So we'd like to invite you to join in. We're not going to sit here and give any lectures or anything, but we thought we might touch on some of the 3 or 4 key themes and areas that Vincent Dance Theatre sort of works with that connect with Cath's work in the Sociology department and her interest and support and sort of programming almost of live art as well. So we thought we might kick off with some questions that Cath can ask me, but we can all answer them really because it's a small group, so it'd be nice to get everybody's involvement really. And I think it's probably true to say that people may come and go and engage with this space, and we'll just let them do that with not much fuss, unless they come down this end and then I'll poke them with my pen or something. So, thank you for coming, everybody.
Should we kick off then?
Yes!
Well, we're going to start with, in some ways, the obvious one, which is to ask about the role of feminism and gender politics and gender equality in your work, because clearly we're in a space that where that's resonating, and there seems to have informed your practice right from the start, so maybe you could just tell us about that and its centrality.
Yeah. Oh, crikey, where to begin? I mean, it's probably worth saying I'm 47, and I've been running the company for 21 years, and I've been practicing for probably, well, since I was 18, professionally, 21 officially. And I suppose my interest in politics goes right back to, well, firstly being a woman, and noticing from a very early age as one of 3 sisters that there are some inequalities and some differences between being a girl and being a boy. I suppose on a personal level, something that triggered something early on was, it's a bit personal actually, I didn't think I was going to say this, but my dad left the family, so we were actually quite a female family for quite a long time. That probably had a big impact. And I suppose also I went to study English literature at university, not choreography or dance, or English lit and drama at Sheffield University. And in the second year of that study, I went to America for a year, to the University of Maryland, as they say, or Maryland, if you're English. And in that second year, I studied American pioneer women's literature, which was a lot of black pioneering literature, and that sort of really caught my imagination and made me think about things differently than if I'd maybe stayed in the UK and done all the classics, or all the contemporary classics. So I was reading and thinking a lot about slavery and black women's literature as well as women's literature, and really studying people like Alice Walker alongside the Sylvia Plaths and the kind of, the British canon, if you like, of feminist literature. There was a whole American canon that, frankly, if I'd stayed here, I don't think I would have even touched upon. So all of that stimulated a very serious acknowledgement of disempowerment and inequality that has stayed with me for the last 25, 30 years of working, really. So I think it's, and then other key moments, I suppose, in my own personal history, getting married and getting divorced, not having children for a very long time, have played into that role of the choices that we make as women, and how we can find equality only by existing in a certain kind of way. And then something that Cath and I have touched on a lot in our communications is that I've always believed that the personal is political. And I suppose if one becomes an artist, then I feel you have a duty to find out what your politics are and place them out there so that you can trigger other people's thoughts and ideas. And so as the company's evolved and the scale's grown and contracted, and the sort of way that we work has changed, the thing that's remained true is my interest in a request for equality and an inherent scripting through everything I do, this notion that it must be possible and that it isn't currently available, real equality. And I suppose as I've got older and wiser and less angry, I've also started to campaign in my own way off the stage as well as on it, by raising awareness about how we run the company as women, how I lead as women, as a woman, how we provide conditions for performers, say with children, to come back to work, And so it's broadened out away from the threads, the sort of aesthetic and political threads within the work, to being also about the organisation that I'm running and how I make it possible for women to flower and grow in that context, and for them to be wholly present as women and as makers, not half present. And what I mean by that is sort of ties in with something that Jude Kelly, who's the Artistic Director at the South Bank Centre, recently said. She said, as professional women, we spend a lot of our time hiding a lot of truths about ourselves, whether we've got kids or not, whether we're fertile or not, whether we're married or not. You know, the personal is kept out of the picture in order to get taken seriously, and therefore we're perhaps only offering part of ourselves to the picture, and that's madness in a way, because to hide a big part of who you are, who you are shouldn't have to interfere with how you operate as a professional. And yet we as women, I think, spend a lot of time secreting away the bits of ourselves that perhaps are the most fundamental or the most important. And so what I'm trying to do within the work, as you'll see if you come and see Aurora's show, which is all about being a mother or not being a mother and being a woman and not being a woman, is that I can do that easily on stage. I can bring colourful images to life that make you think about those issues. But I think I also need to do it off stage in the way that I operate or try to operate as an organisation. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that it's threading through every strand of who I am and what I do as a person, as an artist, as a now mother, as a CEO of a company, as an artistic director and as a maker. And it threads through because I want to try to integrate and be whole in my presence rather than be half of who I am, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a bit more about the art as kind of feminist practice and how, and this might bring in people who have engaged with it or with other feminist art practice. So your work quite often begins from, as you've just talked about, quite personal experiences of being a woman, and quite often represents to some extent, although not in a literal sense, might be more abstract or more fragmented, but represents that experience. So how does that, because it seems to me that it sort of opens a space for audiences, but how does that work, and do you have a kind of sense of that and what you're trying to get from audiences in terms of their experiences and their politics?
Yeah.
And how does it do that kind of political work?
I think some pieces or projects that I do, that relationship's quite subtle, and other pieces and projects that I do, I'm ramming it down your throat. So I think there's a spectrum of how much those politics end up on the stage. But it's interesting for me, having now come to a point where I've been leading the company for 21 years, and I've been reflecting back on a body of work. And what I've realised is, it sounds ridiculous to say this after that many years, that a lot of it is actually autobiographical. And I never call it that, but it's triggered always from wherever I am at in my life. So, for example, the early duets that I danced in were quite angry and fierce and really sort of rah-rah feminist, crash and burn at the beginning of the 90s. And then the piece that I've made more recently that's a big ensemble piece called Motherland, it's actually very beautiful, it's minimal, it's calm, it's considered, it's extremely well composed, it's not angry at all. So I suppose looking back on all the projects I've done, I've realised that each new production marks a moment in my own personal story. And yet it's not only ever about me because I work collaboratively. So the initial concept for any piece of work comes from where I'm at and what I'm thinking about, what I'm interested in, what experience I've just had as me. But because I work with 8, 10, 15 collaborators on each project, it funnels and channels through them, opens really widely out, and then I start to distill it back down into a performance that makes sense, hopefully, to everybody, and that has a universal appeal. So I suppose it's never just my story. It may start from an autobiographical point, like my divorce, or my dad, or my fertility issues, or any of those things, but then it might really expand out through being channeled through multiple collaborators. But then at the end, the shape that the piece takes usually reflects the very beginning thought that I had before I started making it, because it's cyclical. Like I know, because I'm the director and I'm on the outside, that it's going to end up where it started in a sort of T.S. Eliot, kind of in the beginning is the end sort of way. And I suppose the other... So my pieces track my life in that sense, and my life as a woman. And the other thing I suppose I wanted to say when you asked that question is that the work began as duet form, and duet form is about partnering, and it's about giving and taking, and it's about sharing weight, literally, through your limbs, through your centre. And so that's a profound connection that you have with another dancer or another person. That's a physical, emotional, often spiritual connection that if you let go, then they will be dropped and they'll hurt themselves. So you're being strong and vulnerable all in the same moment, which I think is a good summary of what being a woman is in the contemporary world is all about. So partnering has also driven everything I've done. That is, to partner well, you need to be equal. To partner well as a woman. I don't know if I answered your question at all then.
What do other people think? Was there any other responses to that, or people who've either seen Charlotte's work or other kind of feminist art? How does it do feminist work? Can art do feminist work?
I suppose what I think makes my work feminist is that it's made by a woman, and there's always a subtext of asking questions within the work. The images will provoke and they will challenge, and sometimes they'll be beautiful and sometimes they'll be really ugly.
And I suppose what interests me is in that provocation whether you as an artist want a particular outcome. So almost like pedagogically, do you have a message that you want to convey, and that in an ideal world, even though it may not be as causal as that, people are going to go out from that theatre having had that experience and they are going to feel differently about women or equality or something? Or is it more in communicating your experience that you're opening a space where people might take many, many different things from the work, some of them absolutely quite different from what you intended?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy if what I try to do is make work with enough space in it that you can read into it and project onto it your story. So even with Aurora's solo that's on tonight, you could read that as a woman who hasn't had children and wants them, or who's had a child and isn't coping, or who has had a child and I can't remember the third one that I always say, but there's multiple readings of it because it's poetic, it's metaphor, it's not... I don't think I've made a work for a long time that is didactic in the way that, say, Intercourse, which is a work that I made very early on, based on Andrea Dworkin's. Andrea Dworkin's. They're coming to get me. Andrea Dworkin's polemic. I don't think I've been that didactic for a very long time. So I think I work in metaphors, and within a metaphor you can bring to the table what your experience is and hopefully have it reflected back. So although the person is political, the personal can also be universal. I think if you're clear enough about what your intention is, or what images or questions you're trying to raise, then the people watching it will have multiple interpretations of the work. And let's face it, it's dance, a lot of it's movement form, so it's not literal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's musical and compositional rather than text or a play. So I'm not saying, Johnny walks into the room and this is what happens. It's not that literal. So I think there's room for manoeuvre in the work, most definitely. And I have to say, at this point, I don't make work just for women. It's really important to me that it can appeal to men and women, hopefully on an equal basis, because men have their story that they can project as well onto it, or within it.
I'm going to push in a minute at that idea of partnering a bit more. Mm-hmm. I just wondered if there was any thoughts or questions about the kind of theme of feminism, or communicating feminist ideas, or art as feminist, or anything vaguely related to that.
Have any of you seen the work before? No.
Yes, Motherland. Did you see Motherland?
So Motherland. Was it here a few years ago?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah.
It's funny, sitting around here and you're talking, I suddenly just had this incredible vision of Judy Chicago's dinner.
Table,
So you're at the table and you talking about, feminism. And what an incredible impact that had on me. I can remember.
Well, this is a reference to her work.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I suppose the question that we're asking is what makes a work feminist? And have you seen any recently that you'd say, well, that was a feminist piece of work or a female piece of work?
And possibly what can art do that maybe other forms can't? I mean, as a sociologist, feminist sociologist, who kind of teaches feminism in quite different ways, I'm quite interested in the capacity of this aesthetic event that is dance or something that actually is a language I don't understand at all and can't do. I'm interested in that and other aesthetic events, that particularly live art seems to excel in, to open those kinds of spaces and communicate exactly the same ideas that I'm interested in, but in different ways. It sort of seems to create different kinds of knowledge spaces. That can potentially, I'm not saying they always are powerful, because I'm sure they're quite often not, but have the potential to be.
Go back to a simple question. What makes a piece of art feminist, do you think? I mean, is it that you come away thinking that was a feminist piece of art? Or is it just that it moves you in a certain way? I'm interested in that, I suppose. Or is it even important to label it as feminist?
I suppose something that would make you conscious of the particularities of a gender or the struggles between genders.
Yeah.
That's probably what I would say. A work that would make you feel like that.
And do you think a work where, so take an example of where a man and a woman are dancing together, that can so easily be read as a romantic duet. But what I tried to do in the early years was subvert that and make it quite an aggressive, difficult, challenging relationship, so that you'd be kind of shaken up a bit. Because the convention in dance is for it to be romance. And actually, there's levels of subverting what dance is doing in my work as well as what the conventional gender roles are doing. So, for example, when I was dancing for the first 15 years of the company, I would be the base of another woman or of a man, and not very often be the woman that was thrown around. And 2 shoulder operations later, I've suffered for that. But what I was trying to do was say, look, I can be strong, I have muscles, I can lift this huge gymnast on my shoulder and chuck him across the room, as well as be lifted. Or I can lift this tiny woman who's much smaller than me. And I suppose it's not always overt, those kind of inversions of what you might expect to see. It's very commonplace now, but in the early 90s it was less commonplace to see that kind of duetting, I suppose, I think. That it's everything from that image to, like I said, actually making a piece all about fertility and motherhood and all the rest of it, to taking a piece of text like Dawkins' Intercourse and trying to stage it in some way. So there's different ways to kind of attack and for feminism to be read through the work. I suppose it's also worth noting that because I work across disciplines with live music and I design the work, and there's always a very visual aspect to it, and there's usually found objects rather than set designs that look either plasticky or, like they've designed like a pantomime set, which a lot of contemporary dance sort of tries to take you to an imaginary place, whereas I sort of go, well, this is a piece of rope. It's really a piece of rope. It's not something pretending to be a piece of rope. I suppose that is another way to locate it in the real world, so that you feel more at home with the aesthetic, so that you can kind of connect with it more, rather than it being other than. Do you know what I mean? I see a lot of work that removes me from any politics because it's an imaginary world. And I try to create a world that you can believe in, with certainly imaginary and poetical events that happen within it, but that's somehow located in the real world. So it's got real chairs or real stuff in it that ground the human beings that are leaping about in a reality that you might find more human. So then I think by aesthetically doing that, making those choices, you as the audience are more likely to find a human connection with what's on stage, rather than go, oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's amazing, but it's removed from me as a person. So
And that's part of the politics of it too, though, isn't it? Because there is a particular politics to representing what is and what is life. and sometimes you need all the imagination that you've got to even look at what is there and make some sense of what is there, let alone kind of imagining, I don't know, something else or putting something else into that kind of space. Life is complex enough without trying to kind of create something different from life.
Yeah, and I think probably in the early days I was trying to force feed the politics into the work, and now I just trust the process that whatever because I know I'm a feminist now, I don't need to prove that to myself, and I know I'm a woman, and I know I can make things. So I suppose those three things, the confidence of those three things allows whatever it is that wants to bubble up thematically to just bubble up and for you to run with it. Whereas in the early days, I think you're sort of thinking, how can I make a piece that will have an impact and will make people think differently? And now I sort of trust that, because I'm quite a provocative person, I suppose, I trust that whatever it is that I'm thinking about will poke somebody somewhere.
Spark someone.
And if it doesn't, then I've failed to be the kind of artist that I'm interested in being. But I think naturally my character is to analyse and poke and challenge rather than sit back and relax. So I think the more truthful your process is, and my processes are very authentic, as anyone that works with me will tell you, and by that I mean you mine your soul you mine your experience and you mine your life really to put stuff on the stage. Then I suppose if a process is authentic, somewhere it's going to connect to you on a human level, I hope, rather than be this slightly divorced, removed thing that I find a lot of dance does, which is to alienate you or make you clap the effort and the skill rather than the content.
Does it also have the effect of repelling or making people angry?
Yeah.
I mean, authenticity can also, or what people perceive as authenticity, or kind of honesty, or
I mean, you can obviously. I think I'm getting better at not being self-indulgent, because I think there's a layer of working out what it is you want to say, then there's a layer of finding the language to say it, and then for me there's a self-critical layer of like, is this just pure indulgence? Am I just vomiting over the stage with my emotional needs to be in therapy, or is it therapeutic to actually work in a kind of I mean, I've actually done a lot of more therapy-based stuff with very challenging groups in prisons and hospitals and all the rest of it. That's part of my practice. But when I make a piece of work, I'm very mindful of not just using it to bleh, what I need to bleh. And actually I had a brilliant review in the Times once that said something like, I feel this was a piece that Charlotte needed to make more than I needed to see, which I thought was such a great line. This was written by the same critic that said about another piece, as they walked towards us asking us to shoot them, I felt that I would like to comply. So, I mean, he's not a great fan. Yeah. He is a fan, he keeps coming back. But it's those things of like, I think there's the layer of vomiting your stuff, but then what I think I have sounds a bit arrogant, but the skill and the craftsmanship or craftswomanship to make it into something that will allow you access to it, so that it's not just a vomit, if you know what I mean. Because nobody wants to be vomited on, really, do they? Or do they? I don't know. Do you want to be vomited on when you go to the theatre, artistically?
No.
No. Good. Can I ask a question? What do you want from live work when you go and see it? What do you want? Do you want to be stimulated? Do you want to be entertained? Do you want to be made to think about things that you weren't thinking about before you came in the room? You look like you want to say something.
That's a really hard question.
I know. I see what I mean. I'm just provocative. I ask hard questions of
I
everybody.
did think when you said about the vomiting of Nigel Charnock,
Oh, yes.
you see him, I went to see him once here, I think, and he just hurled himself
Yes.
about on the floor. And what is the message? And I didn't want to go and see him again.
Well, God rest his merry soul, because he died last year, but the year before. But I think his work is a fantastic example of somebody fighting their demons and wanting to express it, whatever form it takes. And actually, he was a very skilled performer and very subtle as well as very histrionic in his own work. But yes, I think. I mean, I could see how. I think what he was playing with, both with his work with DV8 and with his own work, was perhaps trying to find a form that allowed him to be who he was, which is was a mix of histrionics and real subtlety and care. And I think, for me, they're the most interesting performers because they are walking a tightrope between extremes, and somewhere in the middle or bouncing between those two places of vulnerability and strength. For me, is the most interesting work. So you may have come away going, what was that? But I bet you also came away thinking, wow, what energy, or what something's just happened and I don't know what it was.
There is a whole strand of work as well that, you know, I don't think your work does fit into, but it's just incredibly kind of antagonistic and hard, and audiences go. I do quite a lot of work with Fierce Live Art Festival, and a lot of their work, and they're people who are stalwarts who've been doing stuff for years, like Franco B and Ron Athey. And it's actually kind of hard to watch. It's kind of quite painful, and it's not pleasurable. There's no pleasure in it at all. And yet audiences really seek it out, you know, and there's some people that just kind of find it an incredibly intense experience. So I mean, maybe this does flip over into the kind of therapeutic element of it as well. But it is interesting that there are different audiences, and audiences come with different needs to different pieces as well.
I think that's right, and I think what's tricky when you make quite complex, layered interdisciplinary works is that you might touch on those kind of Marina Abramovich, Nigel Charnocky moments, and then you might move to something more poetic. And I suppose I'm interested in making long pieces of work because you can really go on a journey through all of those different places rather than, say, with Franco B, you know what you're going to get. And actually, I think perhaps his theatre work is less successful than his installation type work, where people are going to witness him, not in pain, but doing things to himself, bloodletting and all the rest of it, that is a spectacle of a very different type than a theatre spectacle. So I think that whole thing about what are we looking at, what do we want? Do we want to see our own pain reflected? Do we want to see something beautiful and poetic to lift us out of the mundane? Do we want to sort of really find a connection with the questions that we're asking existentially of our own life? I mean, I go to the theatre and to see work for all sorts of reasons, but I know I'm going to have a different experience if I go and sit in front of a Rothko painting than if I go and see Tracy Emin's bed with its condoms and syringes and whatever else is there. Do you know what I mean? I know what I'm letting myself in for. So I think there's a judgment that you make as an audience or as a viewer that locates you in the spectrum of live art or visual art or performance work that you feel comfortable with, and you make those choices. I love the fact that you went to see Nigel and were a bit like, what the fuck was that? I think that's brilliant. Because at least it's stimulation, and God knows we need a bit of, mental and physical and emotional stimulation. Otherwise we're half dead, aren't we, really? Well, I speak from my own experience.
Can I come back to the partnering?
Yes.
Because that's an important
Unless anyone else
theme.
wants to say anything about what you want from live art. I mean, do you want to come away going, what on earth was that? Or do you want something beautiful?
I want to fantasise that I'm the dancer.
Do you? What a lovely statement.
Unless it's Franco B.
Unless it's
I've never seen Franco B, but when you mention that, maybe not. Maybe
when
not.
you say fantasise, I'll come down an octave. When you say fantasise about being a dancer, is that the conventional notion of what a dancer would be, which is sort of graceful and light? No. What is it?
Michael, my husband, and myself have both danced a lot in the States in the early 60s.
Wow.
So it comes from that, and it comes from my mother who was a ballet dancer, but then in America it was all modern Martha Graham, would travel miles to see Martha Graham. So it's very tied up in that sort of 60s. So yes, I would, if I was a Buddhist, I'd say, please, can I come back?
Well, maybe you might.
So yes, so a lot of it is imagining, myself doing that. And being scared, excited, whatever.
Yeah, so
and thinking, oh, bloody hell, I'm in my 70s now. Shit.
Shit, you can't do it anymore.
Shit, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. You see, that's something else as I get older that I'm really interested in, is what happens not only to the female body, but to our bodies as we age. I mean, I seriously have had 2 shoulder operations and I've got arthritis all over, my spine's fucked and all the rest of it. But I wouldn't have changed what I'd done because it sort of brought me to this place. But the body feels it. Yeah. And actually, a lot of my work is becoming about how, I'm allying with people like Claire MacDonald and Liz Aggis and older women particularly, and some older male performers, where we're all asking the questions, how can you put an ageing fleshy body on stage and that still have some currency? I mean real currency, because I'm 3 stone heavier than I was when I danced, and I'm old and I'm arthritic. I'm not as old as you, but obviously I feel old in the spectrum of who we usually see on stage dancing. And actually what I'm trying to do, again, from a political standpoint, is as I age, my ensemble is aging with me. And some of the performers that I work with have been with me for 15 years and now have children and all the rest of it. And it's that thing of let's grow together and see how the work changes, rather than conventional dance companies kind of get rid of the old and bring in the new and the young so that they can carry on prancing. And I'm actually quite interested to know, like, what happens to the work if you can't prance anymore? And you can't even fall on the floor. I mean, we used to at least have in release-based technique, at least have the ability to fall on the floor with ease and beauty. And now we can't even do that because it hurts your bones too much. So it's sort of like, what do we do? Do we end up doing something more installation-y? Does the form change? Do we have to... How do we find confidence in our bodies if we're not fitting the conventional figure of a dancer anymore? Because none of us do really anymore. So all those questions come into play. And for me, they're also feminist questions, because dance audiences are really uncomfortable with looking at fat, cellulite, bodies that have a bum, bodies that have tits, bodies that with grey hair. You know, I mean, I've heard Wendy Houston, who is also a former DV8 dancer, talking many times about how uncomfortable it can feel where someone comes to expect a dance performance and she walks on, she's got grey hair, she's not as slim as she used to be, all those kind of issues. And at times with very young audiences, she's felt very uncomfortable because the expectation has been thwarted by her physical presence. And I think we're beginning to feel that as well. So how does the work adapt? Do you bring in more text? Do you bring in more music? Do you find a different way of being on the stage as an older performer? And all of those questions are about dance being locked in youth. And the most useful and interesting performers that I've seen are not young people. They're really not. So that to me becomes a really interesting and human question around how we view the body, what the body can do, what the body remembers, what it forgets, how it can hold itself up or fall over, how it can hold the space if it's not relying on the aesthetics of a linear form or beauty or vanity. So much dance is based on vanity, which of course has conventionally been a feminist issue as well, about how much you care about how you look. You know, some of the women that work with me are horrified when I say, right, just a bit of mascara. Don't do your hair up. No hairspray.
But if your dance any dance can deal with the messiness and the conflict and all the kind of the horrible stuff of all the other stuff you talked about, fertility and loss and violence, domestic violence, and all of these kinds of things. If it can deal with all of this in an embodied form and what is happening to that body, then it kind of should be able to. I mean, I know the social context, obviously, that you're talking about, but it feels kind of there is a real imperative for dance to also deal with the failures of the aging body, just as it deals with the complexities of the youthful body. Because you're not talking about beautiful embodiments in some ways.
No.
In a lot of your
absolutely not. I suppose it's that thing that's been quoted 100 times about a lot of dance is interested in the leap rather than the fall, and I've always been more interested in the fall. What happens when you land,
and the floor,
and and the crash landing often. So for me, I am interested in the accidents and the messiness and the exhaustion and the repetition and the repetition and all that, rather than what I mean when I say vanity is not hair and makeup. It's kind of look at my line, look at my arm, look at my skinny legs, look at my arabesque. For me, it's a vocabulary that runs out of steam quite quickly for my interest. Whereas, warts and all crafted is something that I find very, very intriguing because I'm drawn in. So when I'm making a piece of work, I know when someone's being vulnerable, and that's when I'll kind of hone in on an improvisation that we're doing, kind of go, there, that's the moment there. What was that? Rather than all the other stuff that might fill up all the space but just be meaningless movement in space. So the challenge for me has always been to try and locate some meaning in movement, some authenticity that can translate to the people that watch it. And that means that I'm on the sidelines of the mainstream of dance, and probably always will be. And that's also a challenging place to be, because at this point in my career, I suppose I feel I should be, lauded more and celebrated more and have bigger audiences and all that stuff like the big boys do in my game. But I would genuinely rather be making the work that I'm making, being seen by fewer people, I suppose, and sitting on the margins of dance, than be in the mainstream and have to make entertainment or have some sort of celebrity collaboration to give my work validation, which seems to be the trend. And that to me is really interesting. Again, it's a personal choice that I'm making about how I proceed.
And arguably all the kind of most radical feminist politics have always come from the margins.
Yeah.
Once it becomes mainstream, then it's no longer radical or doing that kind of radical political work.
I mean, I don't think what I'm doing is that radical, but it seems to be in the landscape of British dance that it still seemed to be a bit risque that I'm talking about these issues. It's like, oh, for God's sake.
Well, I do think there's something...
Let's wake up.
There's something quite radical about that politics of failure. That is a very political thing. I mean, we live in increasingly, it's always been a world where progress and the progress, everything's about kind of moving forward all the time, and things getting better and happy endings and all the rest of it. And actually, somehow articulating that life is actually all about fuck-ups and mess and ruins and getting things wrong and what you do out of that, and that emerging from that can be also quite a generative process, but a different kind of generative than the progress myth, if you like. That seems to me quite a radical politics,
And that's absolutely what you've just described is where I'm at, and have been since the beginning, of sort of digging about in the shit to find what might flower out of it, rather than looking at the flower and going, that's nice. And that sums up my career, actually, because I'm much more interested in digging around and finding what's really there, and then maybe, and there's always beauty in my work, I think. There's beauty in the mess. There's beauty to be found in the shit if you look hard enough, or if you have the craft to just grow a little seedling in amongst the mess. And so I suppose for me a lot of dance is only about the growth and the flowers, and doesn't address that the flowers need water and soil and poo to grow. And it wouldn't be as interesting if you only sat in the poo. But I can't believe I just said that. But you know what I mean, you need both things. And so it is the light and the dark. And I still think, sadly, it is a bit radical to be working in that way still in 2015 in the dance world, on the dance theatre world.
Well, in the content too, there's been loads of the last couple of days, there's been school students, college students and university students, and they've been doing loads of really interesting stuff with all the materials and prompted by the kind of themes of fertility. But what's really come out of today, there's been, you can look at it later, they've made these kind of installations, but the discussions have been about how we can't talk about periods, we can't talk about what's going on inside our bodies, we haven't got a language for it, it's taboo. And these are 21st century, quite trendy, quite well connected, quite privileged students that actually, you would think that they would be the people who could talk about these things, and they can't. And they're finding a mode of expressing really quite complex, difficult stuff through a kind of materiality, because they haven't got the words for it, and they kind of know they haven't got the words for it. And so really I think it shouldn't be radical, but it is.
I think it's absolutely radical for young women to get their hands dirty in a space like this, and handle things like, it's fake blood, but handle things like fake blood. I think what's radical about it is that it's part of a much bigger picture that is about young women especially, and this is me getting on my high horse again, I feel because of digital media are totally disconnected from their bodies. And as people that have worked with our bodies, and made a career out of working with bodies and looking at bodies, I find it really distressing that young women and men are so locked into this culture that they can take pictures of bits of their body, which is what some of these tasks are about, and say it's their breasts and post it online, and for that not to feel like part of who they are. So they're disembodying themselves, actually. and they're taking bits of themselves and making them public in a way that they perhaps should remain private. But the things that would help them if we were able to talk about them, like periods, like seeing your face if you wear a burqa, or any of those kind of things, or talking about fertility issues, or how your hormones do actually really affect your monthly cycle. All those things are completely taboo. Completely taboo. And guess what? If we look at teenage pregnancy, so is sex education. Completely taboo to actually know what happens to create a child at age 13 or 14. We have the highest rate in Europe or something ridiculous, don't we, for teenage pregnancy. Something's not working if young women and men don't know that if you do this and this, you end up with this. She points to baby. Do you know what I mean? So I think that sense of disconnect between how we view ourselves online publicly and how we feel and view ourselves in the real world is a real issue for me. That's actually going to be the basis of the new piece of work that I'll make next year, probably. Because I'm worried, I'm really worried. On tour with Motherland, we did quite a bit of engagement work with young women. And sexual abuse, very common. Letting young boys and men do things to their bodies that I wouldn't let anyone do to mine, very common. On the backs of buses, very common on the way to school. Just like I came away from these workshops kind of going, what boundaries are left? What boundaries of your physical self are left that are not being invaded by men? And guess what? I'll go straight back to Andrea Dworkin. Not for her politic, but for a reference point of like, where are the boundaries gone? Sorry, I've gone off on one, but it is that thing of like, I think young people today are really struggling with what their physical self is and can do and how they represent it through digital media and disassociate from their own self. And I'm deeply worried about that because I think it's poisonous, actually. And as someone invested in bodies, I actually am shocked by it, and I'm not shocked by much. But some of the stories that I heard on tour a couple of years ago, talking to young women and their relationship with their genitals and their bodies and their sense of self connected with young men, was deeply shocking.
It seems in some ways then, although there's new themes emerging around, the online self and things like that, and some of the students today have been doing work around that and this division between online self and real self and all this rest of it. But it also seems, like listening to you talk, as though a lot of the things that you see as being like your contemporary and future concerns and that are generated by young people now, teenagers and young people, are actually pretty much the same as when you started 21 years ago.
This is what I find depressing, doesn't even cover it, that in 25 years of practice, as women particularly, our notion of how we can stand up in the world and be counted and not objectified and pornographied has not, in fact it's got worse, because it's more explicit the ways that our bodies are used and abused. And I think that the thing that still remains is women's, it's not this simple, but in terms of equality, men are very good at shaming women into submission, and I don't think that's changed. I don't think that's changed very much. If anything, it's got worse. We're shamed at work into not stepping up and being confident. We're shamed through pornography and our sense of self of our bodies. We're shamed through day-to-day interactions where even someone as forceful as me can sit in a board meeting, not my own, but other situations where there's men who will totally dominate. And if I dominate, I'm seen to be really difficult. If they dominate, it's fine. I'm sorry, but I utterly refuse to accept that. So I'd rather be known as a difficult person, a difficult woman, than to be silenced. Because my whole career is I will not be silenced by anybody. I won't. Why should I be? So it's sort of that sense of shame. How do you find a place for yourself as a woman in the world? Is an ongoing. It's not going away. My politics would have changed if I didn't feel the need to sort of fight the fight anymore. I would have just given. I would have let it go. But I feel like it's still so boringly present that. Fourth wave feminism, we've got some sassy young women coming through, but I don't know how they're going to affect change until there is true equality, and I don't know how. I'm actually at a loss to know how we find equality when there are still such where society is still shot through with so many challenging layers that keep women down. From everything from being in the boardroom to being high up in organisations, to not having the conditions to have children because we're the only ones that can carry them at the moment, to sort of the conditions that allow women back to work easily rather than really hardly. You know, all those boring practical things that allow women to flourish and be the women that they can be are still not sorted out. I mean, Sweden's leading the way in some respects, but the UK is, I mean, I don't know, what can we do?
You're talking like that really reminds me of, don't know how, if any of people are familiar with Sarah Ahmed's work. She's a feminist based at Goldsmiths, and she's got a really strong public media presence as well as like writing academic work. And she does some stuff around feminists being kind of these willful subjects and always having to assert their will. And they're also the what's her phrase? The killjoys, the feminist killjoys, because they're always the ones who have to say, actually, you know, this is sexist crap, or this is, and point it out. And by doing that, they're kind of killing joy, and always the ones to kind of ruin the humour. But that actually, that you know, that is the only stance you can take all the time. But of course, it's quite exhausting, particularly if it's done personally rather than collectively. But it's kind of getting a momentum, this idea of sort of spoiling everybody's happiness, but being the only way that you can kind of, in any way, keep the feminist agenda on the table. There's a lot of nice resonances.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because, you know, it is really boring. I'm so bored of saying the same things, and I've been saying the same things since 1993. And like I said, if I felt they'd really changed, I wouldn't keep saying them. And I don't want to preach to the converted either.
1993, that's nothing.
I know, well, exactly. I mean, what I mean is publicly through my work. I was probably saying them in the womb, you know what I mean? I mean, of course, it is nothing. And what's interesting for me working with older women is sort of, you realise you're just this blip in the ocean, but that your voice is still, you know, it's part of a canon of women who have been saying the same thing. And you do start to wonder, I suppose, if you're expending energy in the wrong places, if it's not affecting enough change. But I think my latest thing is the sort of interest in things like the He for She campaign, where you're sort of going, can the men please stand up? Okay, so we've done loads of work. Could the men possibly please stand up on our behalf and actually shout about this as well? Because then, men, we might affect some change, which is deeply problematic because I don't want to ask men to help me because I've spent a whole life sort of not asking for men to help me. But on the other hand, if we want equality, we have to work together. So it's not just about women shouting and demanding and feminists making their point. It is about us together, you know, finding a way that increases our presence in the world and our currency in the world. So I am really interested in that as a shift in terms of my own thinking. Of like, how can we get the men on board and to fight the fight with us and for us? And I did a conference at Saddler's Wells a couple of years ago, and it was quite hilarious because it was me and a load of quite well-known choreographers, but it was after lunch, and I basically posed the question, you know, where are our feminist brothers in this? It's the boys that get all the big commissions, it's the boys that get all the big opportunities, it's the boys that get more funding, it's the boys that, men really I should be saying. And then I sort of did pose the question, where are our feminist brothers in this? And of course, because there was a talk called Charlotte Vincent Goes On about sort of women in dance, they'd all gone home. So in the audience, there weren't the big male choreographers because they'd already gone. And so no one answered. So, but you know what I mean? It's like, that's what it feels like. That to me is a great metaphor for like, I can be really passionate, but the people that need to hear it and stand with me have gone because they've got the big commissions to go back to, or the big, you know, the big important meetings to go and have, or the promoters to hassle in the bar afterwards because they don't have to go home and look after their children, or whatever it is. And so that's when it gets deeply irritating, because that call for support, that rally cry, or whatever the expression is not heard. And it's very easy to be sidelined into, oh, there she goes again. She's on her soapbox again. And I feel a bit like that sometimes. So that's problematic, isn't it? Outside of an academic, you know, no one's given me any brownie points for saying any of this, really.
No, of course. I think there's work to be done as well on kind of separating out being a man and masculinity and how particular types of masculinity are really very damaging clearly for women, but they're also very damaging for men.
Absolutely.
And the more that boys and men understand that and realise actually there's a lot in it for them, as it were, as well as for their relations and the women in the world, for them to kind of do masculinity very differently and to widen the range of masculinity that's available, as well as indeed femininity. I mean, arguably that's kind of part of the problem. It's like that our gender norms and structures are so limiting and problematic.
And I feel sorry for young men because I think they're lost. I think a lot of them are really lost. They're either lost in
I
their...
think one of the things, when you ask, just thinking further back, go back to your first question about what you're looking for, I suppose in some ways it seems that the issue is really about trying to include the diversity of possibles rather than necessarily... Because it's about that. It's about the different ways in which you can be male and the different ways in which to be female. I suppose also I think about the he for she thing that I found really heartening was the notion that kind of in a very gentle way it's felt that kind of mission was opened in a sense of there are men out there that love women, they just don't necessarily know the different ways in which they can do it. Let's try and expand those possibilities, shall we? And I kind of thought, well, that's possibly a really kind of humanist and generous way forward of looking at about trying to better understand the ways in which you can be and the ways in which people might want you to be and what being in those different ways might. So maybe it's about trying to look at work that uses the aesthetic to make the different sorts of possibles possible. To kind of keep on putting out there diversity.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's a little bit like, I've done a couple of the Claw leadership courses, and it's a little bit like, there's sort of the more masculine model of leading, or there's what Sue Hoyle might call quiet leadership, and a whole range in between. And I suppose it's that thing of, depending on your character, there are different ways to shout and make a noise about the issues that I'm talking about. And I think the soapboxing it puts people off. I mean, at the same conference where I said, where are our feminist brothers in this? I got told off afterwards by an older choreographer man who said, you must be more beguiling in your approach. Exactly. And I just felt like twatting it. It's just like, what are you talking? Beguiling? And I found that so insulting because, of course, I'm not particularly beguiling because I don't see why I should be. But at the same time, I recognise that if I shout my mouth off, it's just going to put people off. So how do you find the language and the presence and the beguilingness, if that's a word, to sort of get your politics across without alienating
But then
people?
we come full circle maybe because,
But then you're not being authentic.
Yeah.
Well,
You're reinforcing
to me,
the stereotype.
I agree. I actually do agree with that.
But your art practice is different from standing on a soapbox.
Yes,
They're very, very different modes, aren't they? And I guess that goes back to this, that I think if you did go on stage and said all those things in that way, then it's a it's a political rant or whatever, and some people would say and some people would go, But by doing it in the more abstract way, through more abstract forms, then it kind of creates a space where people can take their own stuff from it, put their own stuff in, and maybe experience it, and then somewhere down the line, maybe years and years later, it kind of resonates and things come back and it turns into different kind of knowledge or meaning. So I think there's something very different about what might drive your practice, and then what the practice becomes when it actually goes out there.
I think that's really true, and everything that I've said about sort of, it's a bit like practicing yoga on and off the mat. You sort of practice feminism on and off the stage, and I suppose on stage I'm much more subtle than I am being now, for example, because I know that to go on stage and rant, because I did it in the early days, doesn't really work. Or it appeals to a very few people and they'll pay a ticket to come and see you rant. But I suppose the maturity that comes with craftsmanship is that you can still infiltrate your work with these questions, but they become more subtle and the images become more open, and there is more space for people to bring or take from the work, bring to the work or take from it their own stuff. So that's something I'm learning as I get older, that no one wants a flag waver in the theatre, really, but I'm happy to wave it off stage until things change. But the two things, it's interesting to think about that the practice and the person are one and the same in some ways, but the methodologies are different of how you operate in different contexts.
And they're the same, but audiences might not.
No, and
You know,
that's right. And people might come to say Motherland and think it was quite a subtle, minimal piece of work, and then they might hear me talk and realise that I am ranting completely because I'm still really cross about things even at this age. I'm still furious that we're not equal in terms of opportunities and finance and leadership potential and all of those things that I could list. You know, childcare, domestic situations. You know, that stuff is still very real, and it's holding us back, and we need to find ways to continue to address the practical as well as the ethical in order to release women to be the leaders and artists and creative people and dancers and whoever are politicians that they can be. Because we're good enough to do it. We just need the conditions to be correct, I think.
Are there any other questions or comments or anything?
I'm conscious of the time. It's
Yeah,
15 minutes before the show starts. And if anyone wants their gin and tonic, are people coming to the show?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Do we want to spend 2 more minutes? Does anyone want to respond or say anything in response to what we've been talking about? Anything at all? Can we whiz around the circle? What does this conversation leave you with? Let's start with you.
With me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was like...
That's okay, no problem.
I was breastfeeding my baby. So
There you go.
Stays within
Love
the
that.
theme. Well, what I was thinking actually was, as someone who is tries to incorporate feminism in my teaching practice, I'm a lecturer here in the Department of Sociology. I was just thinking of that moment that I think you get both in pedagogy but also in art, where your audience, whether that be your students or your actual audience, turns to you and says, after a 10-week module or a half-hour performance or however long, turns to you and says, okay, you've now opened my eyes to X, Y, and Z, and I will never be able to unsee this thing that I can now see because of the art that you've presented or the teaching. And so what do I do now? You know, now I have to go back into the world with this enhanced vision, but what do I do when I go back home for Christmas? Or what do I do when... Yeah. And it's that moment where you both feel, yes, you know, something has happened, shifted, but also, and you've empowered people in a particular way, but also that moment of vulnerability that you leave them with as they leave that experience of transformation. So, and certainly that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I think it's it's a dilemma that we're left with when we try to have transformatory practices, whether that is in teaching or in art. So that's what I was thinking about as I was listening to you.
Great, that's really interesting. Let's whiz round. Any other just very brief thoughts about the lady over there who's not looking at me? So she doesn't.
No, because you said the word gin and tonic.
So say something quickly for me, and then we can move
Gin and
on.
tonic.
That's what's in my
What does this conversation leave you with? Very briefly.
Well, I guess what I was thinking earlier about whether you've ever had misreadings of your work. I don't know if anyone was here for the dance event last week, which was really it was really disturbing, because there was one of the things I love about dance is its inherent ambiguities and that there's so much open to it. And this was a piece which seemed to be have around 10 minutes of women fighting men off. And I was thinking about the difficulties of exploring deeply disturbing practices through dance, where you can not always know what the feelings might be generated by that. And I was going to ask it earlier, but then the time is ticking, and that whole gin and tonic thing is quite
That's a good point. We can come back to that after the show if you want to have a gin and tonic and talk about it. Just very quickly, I'm just really intrigued to know what a conversation like this leaves people thinking about, just really briefly.
Perhaps my thoughts were that a lot of talk around this area of feminism quickly dissolves in many aspects. I don't know, in my brief kind of experience of work as well, initiatives of equality and things like that, you find that they take place, and yet it's of a moment, and you know the undercurrent is ever there, you know, and in fact you might have, I don't know, feel like you're progressively making things better, or but in such, I don't know, they're more concrete than they were before. So
that's interesting.
I feel like that now.
I guess the question that comes out of that is, what can you personally do to effect a change to stop that carrying on? That's what I immediately think of.
Yeah, but I also agree that there is an aggressive strain of masculinity that is ever moving as well, and it's from industry to industry. And you were talking earlier about perhaps how women in particular, as well as men, present themselves on the internet and how they disembody themselves and take part of a form. But that is, the end product of a heavy masculinized industry like technology. And it is so concentrated as well. So anyway, yeah.
Very briefly, any couple of words?
Well, I just had so many thoughts, and I usually only know what they are the next day. Very slow,
Yes.
So I'm a ferment of thoughts. But I can't offer you any one that would be brief.
I'm just texting my technician to say go up 5 minutes late with the show, which will be fine. Okay, yeah, ferment of thoughts is good. What about you?
Quite a lot of ferment. Compost, I'd say.
The poo's come back.
Yeah. The poo's come back. Okay. But yes, it's, a lot of my life has been involved with the ideas of feminism and dance. So they're both, as it were, difficult passions.
Yes, yeah.
And, luckily have lived with quite a few men. I don't mean I've lived with them all. I've seen men trying to be brothers. And that's given me some heart in my life.
Yeah, me too, I have to add.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And finally, any thoughts?
Well, yes, Leamington in the 70s was a hotbed of feminism. I don't know what wave it was. Now I get muddled by the waves, but it was and I think it stimulated quite a lot of men. And I would say we transmitted to our son and daughter some of those ideas, coping. But I'm quite pessimistic about the grandchildren. We've got two granddaughters and two grandsons, and I think things have got a lot worse. I agree with you, and particularly the whole neoliberal thing we haven't discussed that, the whole move of money and separation of society on gender and money and wealth. It's absolutely disgusting. We had hope. I think we had hope after World War II about progress. Was it called modernism, I think, and that's faded away. We've lost it completely. So we're struggling on, but I'm quite pessimistic.
And on that happy note,
sorry about
ladies and gentlemen, we're going to draw this discussion down just because he says okay, so you don't need to rush too much in going in. He'll hold the door. Grab that gin tonic. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's really nice to see you. I hope you enjoy the show.
We are here.
No, the show, if you don't know, the show is happening in the studio theatre, so you need to walk across the foyer.